Okay, so we've got a ton of really interesting stuff to dig into today. You guys have sent in some really fascinating articles and reports all about AI and how it's going to mix with these like incredible advances we're seeing in longevity science.
Mhm.
So our goal today is to kind of, go through all this material and pull out the most important points, really trying to understand how all of this could change, like what it means to be human, what our purpose is, even how society itself might be structured differently.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing the range of topics that are covered in this stuff. We've got everything from like the big existential questions, like what happens to the idea of human purpose when AI can do almost any job, to really practical concerns like how can we even be sure that the information AI gives us is actually reliable? Oh, and of course, then there's the whole question of what happens if we all start living a lot longer, like way longer. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is.
Yeah.
One of the first things that jumped out at me when I was going through these sources was this idea of like, how do we define purpose in a world where AI is becoming so capable? One of the articles even straight up asked, if AI and robots can do almost everything, even intellectual work, what's left for us to do? Like, what's our role then?
Yeah, and it makes you think about things in a totally different way, right?
Yeah.
Like, for most of human history, we've been driven by survival. Basically, we had to work to live. But the sources we have here suggest that AI could, like, free us from that. Think about that Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing. AI could help us get past those basic needs, like food and shelter, so much faster. And then we'd be able to focus on higher level stuff like belonging, achieving things, and, like, self-actualization, whatever that means.
Right. So instead of working because we have to, we could actually work on stuff that we're passionate about. One of the sources even calls it technology is a vacation from survival. I thought it was a pretty cool way to put it.
Yeah, it's a really powerful image. Like, imagine if we weren't constantly worried about just getting by. What will we actually want to do with our lives? How would we define success or achievement? That's where this whole idea of redefining purpose comes in. It's not like we wouldn't have a purpose anymore. It's just that it would be different.
Makes sense. Yeah. But all of this AI stuff also brings up some worries. Like one thing I was thinking about was how do we know if what AI tells us is actually true? If it's learning from all this online data, isn't there a chance it could be picking up a lot of bad information too?
Yeah, that's a big concern. It's like, one of the sources compares AI to a kid learning from the world around it. So if the world it's learning from is full of like, junk information or biases or even deliberate lies, then the AI is going to learn that stuff too.
Right. So it's like garbage in, garbage out, but on a massive scale. And that same source also talked about how AI develops, and they use this analogy of Superman. I thought that was really interesting. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. Basically, the idea is that AI, like Superman, has all this incredible power. But whether it uses that power for good or bad depends on how it was raised, so to speak. In this case, it's all about the data it's trained on and the basic principles it's programmed with. So the developers and the people who are like, setting the ethical guidelines, they have a huge responsibility.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of reassuring that one of the sources says the biggest danger right now isn't some super intelligent AI that's decided to destroy us. It's more about how humans might misuse the AI we already have. Like in the next 5 to 7 years, that seems to be the more immediate problem.
Right, that's the stuff we need to be focusing on now. Like, yeah, the idea of a fully developed, peaceful AI is great, but right now we have to worry about things like people using AI for, harmful purposes, like making weapons or spreading misinformation. That's a very real threat.
Definitely. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, we also got a lot of material on this whole longevity thing. I mean, if we do start living significantly longer lives, it raises some big questions about sustainability. Like, can the planet actually support that many people for that long?
Absolutely. I mean, if we just live longer without, changing anything else, it's going to put a huge strain on the environment. But the sources we have here also talk about some potential solutions, like technology that could help us make things more sustainable.
Right, like those articles about biotechnology, vertical farming, and lab-grown meat, right?
Exactly. That stuff could completely change how we produce food, make it way more efficient and sustainable. And, if we don't need so much land for traditional farming and raising animals, we could use that land for other things.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's funny, one of the sources also talked about how younger generations are already spending so much time in virtual worlds. I wonder if, if we all live longer, will that trend just keep going? And, what's that going to mean for the balance between our physical lives and our digital lives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As virtual reality and all that gets more and more realistic and we potentially have more time to spend in those worlds, Finding a balance is going to be super important, both for our own mental health and for, like, how society functions.
Sure. Okay, another big theme was how AI could change some of the fundamental parts of our society. Things like government, education, and healthcare. One of the sources even talked about Abu Dhabi moving towards AI-driven governance as a model for the future. What do you think that would look like?
Well, I mean, AI is really good at processing huge amounts of data, right? So the idea is that it could be used to help governments make better decisions, maybe even automate some of the decision-making processes. The goal would be to make things more efficient, cut down on bureaucracy, and, make policies based on actual data instead of just like opinions or whatever. That could lead to better public services and better use of resources.
Hmm, that's interesting. And when it comes to education, personalized learning powered by AI sounds pretty amazing. Like, imagine if each student had a completely customized curriculum based on their own needs and how they learn best.
Exactly. AI could analyze a student's strengths, weaknesses, and like their learning style, and then create a learning plan that's just for them. That could make learning so much more effective and way more engaging for every student.
And then there's healthcare. I mean, this idea of AI-powered healthcare that's personalized and basically free, that's kind of hard to wrap your head around, especially with how expensive healthcare is now.
Yeah, it's a big shift for sure. But, AI could help doctors diagnose things faster and more accurately, speed up the process of discovering new drugs, and create treatments that are tailored to each patient. And if you combine that with all the advances in biotechnology, we could really move towards a system of like preventative healthcare where we're focused on keeping people healthy instead of just treating them when you're sick.
Right, right. But of course, all this amazing stuff probably comes with some big price tags too.
Yeah.
One of the sources talked about how a lot of these longevity treatments are super expensive right now, so only really rich people can afford them.
Yeah, that's a major issue. I mean, it's kind of how it always goes with new technology, right? The first versions are really expensive and only accessible to a few people. But your source also pointed out that the cost of biotechnology has been going down really fast. We've seen it with gene therapies. And, even just think about how much cheaper smartphones are now compared to when they first came out.
So you're saying there's hope that these longevity treatments will become more affordable over time. That article even suggested that by 2040 they might be widely available, and we could even see people reversing their biological age. That's a pretty big prediction.
It is, yeah. But it's based on how fast things are developing in this field and how quickly new technology tends to spread. And if that does happen, it's going to have a huge impact on everything on society, the economy, our individual lives. It's almost impossible to imagine what that would be like.
Wow, yeah. It seems like all of this really comes back to education, though, doesn't it? If the world is going to change this much this fast, our current education system doesn't seem like it's really preparing students for that. One of the sources even said that straight up. So what kind of skills and knowledge do you think will be most important in this AI-driven future?
The source we have here focuses on two main things. First, being able to figure out what you're passionate about early on in life. And second, learning how to ask the right questions. Because think about it. In a world where AI can give you tons of information, the most important skill will be being able to figure out which information is actually valuable and then asking the questions that will help you understand it better.
Yeah, and the article also talked about this idea of immersive experiential learning. That example of using VR to experience ancient Greece with a virtual Socrates was so cool. It seems like that would be so much more engaging and effective than just reading a textbook.
Oh, absolutely. These immersive technologies could totally transform education. Instead of just sitting there passively, students could be actively involved in their learning. That would make it so much more memorable and help them understand things on a deeper level.
Totally. But one thing that stood out to me was when one of the sources talked about how human nature itself might be the biggest obstacle to all of this. They talked about how we're naturally prideful, stubborn, and resistant to new ideas. And I mean, let's be honest, that's pretty true, right?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge. We all like to stick with what we know, even when it's clear that things need to change. But that's actually where AI could be really helpful.
Really? How?
Well, AI doesn't have all the emotional baggage that we do, right? It can analyze situations and data without being biased or letting feelings get in the way. So it could help us see things more objectively and come up with better solutions to complex problems, like global issues. One of the sources even talked about using AI to help with negotiations, and it could also help us predict how industries are going to change so people and businesses can adapt before it's too late.
Okay, so it seems like the overall message here is that We should be excited about these advancements in AI and longevity, not afraid of them. They're not necessarily threats. They're more like powerful tools that we can use to create a better future.
Exactly. If we're smart about how we develop and use AI, it could help us redefine what it means to have a purpose, revolutionize education, make healthcare accessible to everyone, and ultimately improve the human condition.
It all comes down to what that one source said. We have to learn to think differently and adapt to this rapidly changing world. It's a big challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity. And I think that's the question we should all be asking ourselves. What parts of our lives are going to be most affected by all of this? And what can we do now to be ready for it?
Yeah, that's a question worth pondering.
Absolutely. And that's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.